We've now got a video from Dame Stephanie Shirley, who's got an incredible story to tell about how she's led the way in pioneering a software business that she set up in the 1960s. If you're not into tech, it truly is an inspirational story for many, and so enjoy.
I've been asked to tell you about my professional life. To get past the gender issues of the early 1960s, I set up my own high-tech software company, one of the first such startups. And it was a company of women, a company for women, an early social business designed to resolve the gender issues in a financially sustainable way. To try to sell software, which at that time was given away free with the hardware, made me the laughing stock of the industry. No one can sell software, they said, least of all a woman. Although women were then coming out of the universities with decent degrees, there was again that roof to our ambitions. And I bumped into that roof too often. I wanted opportunities for women. I recruited professionally qualified women who, as was then the norm, had left the computer industry to marry or have children, and structured them into a home-working organization, a 20th century cottage industry. And we pioneered the concept of women going back into the workforce after a career break. We pioneered all kinds of flexible working, job shares, then profit shares, and later co-ownership when I got a quarter of the equity into the hands of the staff at no cost to anyone but me. We paid for work done rather than time spent. And with a cafeteria of benefits so people could choose between direct pay and holidays, pensions, or perks. And my generation of women fought the battles for the right to work and for equal pay. Today, women expect men to fight alongside, for still we fight. When strong young men offered to carry my equipment for me, I used to reply somewhat tetchily, I believe in equal pay and will carry my own things. Nowadays, I sigh, oh, how kind, thank you so much. No one expected much from women in work because all expectations were about home and family responsibilities. And I couldn't accept that, and so started to challenge the conventions of the time, even adopting the name Steve in business letters to get through the door before anyone realized that he was a she. My company, called Freelance Programmers, which was exactly what it was, started on our dining room table with what would now be £100, but financed by my own labor and later a second mortgage on our marital home. People often ask me if I'm a feminist. Indeed, yes, but not in word. I'm a humanist, totally committed to valuing each human being and convinced that every single person can make a difference. I thought business would fast forward my career in software because that's what I loved. But nasty surprise, soon found myself swamped by administration, without which nothing gets done, human problems, tax issues, cash flow, data gathering. I was paying other people to do all the interesting stuff. And I learned then of my low boredom threshold. Lots of people have ideas. The difficulties come with the implementation. My interests were scientific and the market was commercial. So I went for compromise operational research work, which was both intellectually challenging for me and commercially valued. Scheduling freight trains for British Rail, timetabling buses, stock control, lots and lots of stock control, everything from cables, which come in vast rolls and lose value when you cut them, to ice cream, which came in tiny little tubs and melt. Gradually, the work came in. Lots of interesting tasks because I chased after everything that moved. We disguised the domestic and innovative nature of the workforce by offering fixed prices, one of the first to do so. Who would have guessed that the programming of the black box flight recorder for supersonic Concorde was done by a bunch of women working in their homes, 30 of us. It was an important, valuable, and exciting project. Our programmers, remember, only women, including non-binary, and this was 60 years ago, worked with pencil and paper to develop flow charts defining each task to be done. And they then wrote code, usually machine code, sometimes binary, which was sent by mail to a data center for punching onto cards or paper tape. Then repunching it in order to verify it. All this prior to submission to the mainframe computer. Our schedules were based on 2 such accesses to the computer a week. That was programming back in 1962. In 1975, 13 years from my company's startup, Britain's sex discrimination legislation came in, which meant it was illegal to have our pro-female policies. And as a fine example of unintended consequences, we had to let the men in. When I started my company of women, the men said, how interesting, but of course it only works because it's small. And as the company grew, the same men commented, yes, it's sizable now, but of no strategic interest. Later still, when the company was valued at nearly $3 billion, and I'd made 70 of the staff into millionaires, they had the nerve to say, well done, Steve. But of course, it's nothing new. What an attitude to change. You can always tell ambitious women by the shape of our heads. They're flat at the front from beating our heads against brick walls, and flat on top from being patted patronizingly. When my company was finally acquired in 2007, it was a quoted PLC with branches worldwide, including Salford, Leeds, indeed nationwide. We were in the FTSE 250. We had a staff of 8,500 people, men and women, which is as it should be. I'm often asked for the secrets of commercial success. And one key is to surround yourself with people who work smarter than you do. My colleagues will confirm I do that. And people that you like, not people like you. Another is to choose any partner very carefully. The other day when I said, my husband's an angel, a woman complained. You're lucky, she said. Mine's still alive. I've learnt to always let him have the last word, so long as it's yes, dear. We're so different that people were surprised when we married. He is a Geordie, by the way. As you will know from my 100% honest memoir, our marriage was not all honey, but I'm proud to say that we are still together after more than 60 years. Do feel free to applaud. Women's careers often depend on our child rearing. So let me tell you about the family side of my life. Our late son Giles was a beautiful, contented baby. And then at 2.5, like a changeling in a fairy story, he lost the little speech that he had and turned into a wild, unmanageable toddler. Not the terrible twos. Giles was severely autistic, and he never spoke again. We got him into a good primary school for non-communicating children, and for a few years we had a relatively reasonable time, but couldn't get him any secondary schooling, so he stayed at home with me. And that was a dreadful period for all of us. When Giles was 13, I broke down, basically ceasing to function. Vulnerable children bring out the best in most of us, most of the time. But their incessant demands can expose our own weaknesses. Both of us finished up in hospital. Me for a month. I was only back at work after a year. Giles stayed in a locked ward of an old-style subnormality hospital. And he would have stayed there forever. After all, asylum means a safe place. Except that after 11 years, as happens so often in institutions, he began to lose his human rights. I don't want to go into detail. So we decided to look after him again ourselves. And by this time, we could afford to have paid help. It took us 6 years to deinstitutionalize him. But eventually, Giles was living a simple but dignified life in the community and became the first resident in the first home of the first charity I founded. Today, Autism at Kingwood is where it started, is a medium-sized corporate. It supports over 150 adults with autism 24/7 and is contracted to provide 1 day a week support to another 100 who in the main are able to live independently. It took me a further 11 years, yes, 17 years in total, to get Autism at Kingwood sustainable, managerially and financially independent of me. Then 5 years for the next charity. I'm a learning person, but I was also then able to invest more money, which also always eases things. Then just 2 years for the last charity. Correction, latest charity. Total cost to date, some 68 million. Entrepreneurs tend to pursue several goals simultaneously. And I'm so lucky to always have something to get up for each morning. Because after Autism at Kingwood, there was the groundbreaking Priors Court School for nearly 100 young people aged 5 to 25 with autism. And after 20 years, That's grown into a sizable residential school with an artisan bakery as a small subsidiary, and is currently seeking a second site in order to extend the good it does. My most strategic charity is Autistica, which funds autism research. There's much that we don't know about how to get people with autism leading long, healthy, and happy lives. Autistica will probably always remain a small organization, but together those three charities employ over 1,000 people. Going back to my company, I had no experience in running an organization, and in a way, ignorance was bliss. No one had told me what one shouldn't do in business, so I went ahead and did it. I wasn't constrained and had the freedom to innovate and to make mistakes. For example, my lack of commercial expertise meant that our pricing started off wrong and stayed wrong year after year. Profitless prosperity, though it did get us market share. On the other hand, I came up with new ways of marketing, new ways of staffing, new ways of financing the business. Because what carried me through was the belief that I had the guts necessary for any leader to cope with failures, and I had many. To admit to mistakes, face up to them, pick myself up, and move on. The company's success was hard-earned. We failed as often as we succeeded. We sold our Danish subsidiary to the staff, our Dutch subsidiary to a client, and closed down the American company, only to restart there some 20 years later. The one that really took off was India. And in 2007, when the company was acquired, half the 8,500 staff were there. There were years with lots of activity, but no profit. There were years of profit when we went international, followed by years of retrenchment. And this audience will know how business is never, ever boring. Two factors really account for the company's long-term growth. They're both to do with control. First, the concept of spreading ownership as widely as possible throughout the firm. And secondly, where many entrepreneurs fail, I realized my own limitations and brought in professional managers to take the group forward. Both industry and the charitable world are littered with horror stories of organizations whose founders hung on too long, basically suffocating the spirit of their brainchild. In my case, I recognized that I had been a superb technician and was an excellent director, strong on strategy, full of ideas and energy, but merely a dutiful and competent manager, one that hates paperwork, hates politics, hates bureaucracy. So I decided to back out from the day-to-day management of the company. And at my third attempt, I was able to establish a suitable successor. But relinquishing management control proved painful. And that period was one of heavy strain. For me, I became highly stressed, both at home and professionally, traveling too much, smoking too much, exercising not at all. I burned out, and broke down. It's not easy to build a business. The cost in human terms can be horrendous. Ironically, the more successful a company was, the less I enjoyed it. And my role changed over the years. My management style also had to change from entrepreneur to businesswoman to corporate. As a software entrepreneur, I made serious money. By the millennium, I was worth over 150 million, a chunk of which a goodly chunk, I lost in the dot-com bubble. And it was 25 years before my company paid a dividend. Even Bill Gates took 10 years with Microsoft. Success, whatever that means, success is found at the edge of failure. And if it were easy, we'd all be millionaires. My Giles died suddenly and unexpectedly when he was 35 years old. I'd already lost my parents, my foster parents, and my sister. Most things get easier the next time, but that's not true of grief, the last expression of love. I lost all momentum. But eventually, my energy returned and was followed by a period of tremendous creativity. Because whenever I find a gap in autism services, I try to help. And so that some of my wealth goes back to the industry from which it stems, I've also founded IT ventures, such as the Oxford Internet Institute. And this focuses on the social, economic, legal, and ethical issues of this network of networks, not the technology. Philanthropy is all that I do now, nothing to do with stamps. But I need never worry about getting lost because several charities would quickly come and find me. People think philanthropy is just for wealthy people, but everyone can be a philanthropist. If you give 50p to a street person, that's a generous act. But once you start thinking, what's this person doing here? How can we get her into employment, him into a shelter? Then you become a philanthropist. Every single code of ethics mandates the strong to look after the weak. Whatever we do for others, in business or not for profit, is doing it for ourselves. You too can give skills, time, money. You too can be a philanthropist. I put as much effort into making sure I give money away wisely and get just as much satisfaction as I got from making it in the first place. Because giving and the service of others has given meaning to my life. And I conclude with a misquote from George Bernard Shaw. Reasonable people adapt themselves to the world. Unreasonable people attempt to adapt the world to themselves. All progress, therefore, depends on unreasonable people.
Thank you, Dame Stephanie. My name is Mohammed and I'm the QA manager here in the tech department at AO.
Hi, I'm Jane Lawson. I'm a developer here at AO.
That was an inspiring and inspirational talk. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our partners for International Women's Day, who work hard by empowering women in tech. I wondered if I could ask you a few questions about your story and your talk. Firstly, I want to ask, as a woman in the 60s, what gave you the confidence and how did you know you could start your own company and be successful?
Well, I didn't. I always believe in taking a risk and then making things happen. The motivation was not in any case to make money. It took, as I said, 25 years before we actually made any serious money or made any money. But it was part of my crusade for women. I wanted opportunities for me. I wanted opportunities for other women. I was beating up against that glass ceiling for so many years. I thought, I'm going to set up a company. That's the sort of company I would like to work for, that other women would like to work for, that has the things that women are always asking for, flexibility and work-life balance. And every survey comes up with those two. And my company, originally called Freelance Programmer, so it was motivated by different things. I got pleasure from it right from the beginning. But of course, it was very hard work because I didn't know what I was doing.
I'm in awe of the innovation that you've made around flexibility and home working, and it seems timely that we're talking about this during the biggest worldwide home working experience.
I saw you speak recently, and you said one of the requirements you asked people at interviews was, do you have access to a phone?
Well, people didn't have phones in those days.
Exactly, never mind laptops, Wi-Fi, Teams, etc., that people think it's necessary to make it possible.
It was equally exciting in a different way. You were still doing new things, finding out new routes, learning from each other at a very high rate. They should have taken rent from me because I was working such long hours that I was like a tenant there. It was so exciting, and I would never want to change that.
I would love to go back in time and see women writing code in longhand and in pencil. It just seems unimaginable.
Women did actually start off in a very positive way through the what's now the National Museum of Computing, but through coding at Bletchley Park. Yes. That was almost entirely female, and it was classed as just being part of the clerical sector, not important at all. And it took some time for actually software engineering to be respected for what it is.
When you started your company, you set out to employ women. Was that a desire to promote the welfare of others, or was it more of a strategic decision?
It was a crusade for women. How can I get women like me having the opportunities that I desperately wanted? And home working was one solution. Of the first 300 staff that we had, 3 were men, so we always employed a few men, but it just shows the balance, and it remained very female for a long time. I had a lovely photo taken when we had a company reunion a couple of years ago, and looking at everybody, there were a few men scattered around the hundreds of women. We had a lovely time.
Did you find as your company changed in the 70s and you were required to bring on more men, that it changed the nature or culture of the company? And if so, how?
Partly it was the legislation, but partly it was also we got to the stage where we were making acquisitions, which necessarily was bringing in male management, and that changed the balance for a long time. When you look at the growth of the organization over the years, the female aspect stayed for many, many years. It stayed in team working. It stayed because we work collegiately. I'll help you this morning. I don't mind asking your help this afternoon. These are things that women, we do automatically without really being taught it. And that stayed with the company so that it had a very different feel to it. The men brought in new skills. I think they taught us, the female staff, how to project themselves as knowledgeable rather than sort of poo-pooing. Well, of course, I've done a little bit of that, and when in fact they'd done 6 years. It's extraordinary the way in which women, we denigrate ourselves and don't sort of say what I have done is terrific and I did it and we did it, and not a question of just following other people. I think women are very innovative. I think the need to survive is always important. And certainly in the north of England, women have worked from home for generations. It is not something new. what is new is that it's for an intellectual process such as computer programming. So we're part of a long development, and we make it happen. And if we don't make the future happen, then we have to suffer the consequences.
I'm curious about the profit sharing. That must have been revolutionary at the time. Can you tell me why you did it and why you thought it was necessary?
I don't think it was necessary. It just seemed to me that with the service industry, and we were one of the first service industries, the success depends on the people. I hadn't put any money in. I put some ideas in, put some concepts in, a little bit of money, I suppose. But it's the people who made it happen. And it seemed to me right and proper and correct that people should share the successes as they share the risks. We'd always had a bonus system, but in the 70s recession, it went out every 6 months. And I can remember writing over a period of 3 years, 6 letters saying, you know, I'm pleased to tell you, we've come to the end of another 6 months. We're still alive, but the bonus this year is 0. And John Lewis at the moment is having to do a similar thing. A bonus is a bonus. And it seems to me that they helped me through that recession to an extent that really made it appropriate to share with them.
It is still fairly uncommon to meet women who run their own software companies. Is there anyone you think that's doing well or that you admire in the industry that you could talk about?
I'm really not up to speed on the industry. I don't know the companies that are coming up. But in a sense, we're all in IT these days. And a woman I do admire is the 60-year-old Anne Bowden, who set up Starling Bank, which was a telephone-only banking system, very revolutionary. I think it was 2014, and she's not young. She's not as old as me, but she's not young, and she has made a real good success of something that is really disruptive. It's different. It leads the way. Anne Bowden.
On behalf of AO, I'd just like to thank you so much for being able to spend some time with us and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.